Welcome to the Bible for Kids podcast with your hosts, best-selling children's author Amy Parker and author and co-creator of VeggieTales, Mike Naraki. If instilling biblical values in kids is important to you, this podcast will help give you the resources, wisdom, and hope to do just that. Now let's join our hosts, Amy and Mike, for this week's episode.
Welcome to the Bible for Kids podcast. I'm Amy Parker.
And I'm Mike Naraki, and Amy and I are thrilled to welcome Laura Gallier to the podcast today. In a youth culture intrigued by the paranormal, yet often skeptical of biblical claims, Laura seeks to bring awareness and understanding to issues surrounding the supernatural. Having battled her own enemies of the soul throughout her teen and young adult years, she's on a mission to expose deception with the light of truth, bringing hope and healing to a generation in need. Laura lives in the greater Houston area with her husband, Patrick, and their 3 children.
But we like to start every Bible for Kids podcast with a Bible verse, and today's verse is from Ephesians 6:12. Very fitting. For our struggle is not against flesh and blood, but against the rulers, against the authorities, against the powers of this dark world, and against the spiritual forces of evil in the heavenly realms.
Laura, welcome to the podcast, and it's so good to have you on.
I'm so glad to be here. Thank you so much.
So those struggles with spiritual forces are a big part of your work as an author, and we're going to dive into that in a few minutes, but we'd love to first hear about a bit about your faith journey. Did you grow up in the church? How were you first exposed to Christianity, and how did that shape your early experiences?
You know, I did not grow up in the church. I did not grow up in a Christian home. The way I see it now, looking back as an adult, God completely intervened in my life. A friend's mom in the 3rd grade shared the gospel with me. And I understood by the Holy Spirit my need to accept Jesus as my Savior and be forgiven. It was very real and genuine. I was born again as a young girl, but I went right back into my home with a single parent. I lived with my mom, and there was just no talk really of spirituality. We went to church maybe on Easter if the alarm went off on time, kind of thing. And so the way I like to explain it is I really had that heart for God that comes from the Holy Spirit, but my head was just full of the world and worldly thinking. I wasn't discipled. And so consequently, I had some really tough, struggles as a young girl.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And so did you also love reading at an early age? What were some of the books that you remember reading that really captured your attention?
I wish I could sound scholarly and say that.
It's okay. I read the Babysitter's Club. So.
I mean, I was like lucky if I did my homework. I was just one of those kind of misfit kids. Early in life, I decided, and again, these are all, spiritual influences that bring these things, but that the answer to my need for a father was going to be found in boys. And so I got caught up in all of that. And so, reading was just like, not even on my radar, unfortunately, growing up.
But that also speaks to the just miracle of transformation here. I mean, here you are, and I've heard that time and time again with other authors. They were, I read one the other day, I think on Twitter or something, that he had posted that his, teacher had told him he was the worst writer in the class, the worst reader in the class, and now he's writing books. So I think that's just part of God's transformation.
Exactly. I always say that in college, the 2 classes I failed were speech and writing and composition, and now I teach and write. So again, you just get the most opposition in the area of your gifting and calling anyway. So yeah. Expected.
Well, and you are such an imaginative and talented writer. What about writing? I mean, did you have a love of writing, even though you hadn't, practiced at it at an early age? When did that start to form in you, that sort of the love of writing?
Yeah, it's a great question. There was a writing contest in the 1st grade, and it was an anti-drug, drug awareness campaign. And I remember just getting so into writing my paper. All the students left. I stayed after class, and I ended up winning the contest.
Yeah.
And there were a couple of occasions just growing up where like my paper would get picked to be read to the class. And so definitely there was a God-given talent. But then, as you guys know, especially you, I know you've written numerous books, that you have to harness that talent and learn. And so by the time I got to be a young adult and I'd been through all these experiences and I wanted to communicate these certain truths, it became really, I was just motivated by wanting to communicate. And then of course I had to learn the craft and the rules and the do's and the don'ts. Yeah. But so it definitely started with the passion to communicate truth and then took off from there.
Well, and I found too that, you know, the reading that I'm most attracted to reading is just from authors who are just really transparent and honest. You know, not necessarily that have like the best turns of phrases and everything, but just that, yeah, this is something that really relates to a, you know, deep human emotion, that this author just is really, you know, kind of giving words to, you know, what I've thought, you know, and what I know to be true. And that's really, you know, kind of the best connection that I've gotten from authors before. Is that something that you felt in your writing?
Yes. And really, you know, again, just in complete honesty, I would try to pick up books, especially as an adult, and think, oh, I'm going on vacation, I'm going to read this novel. And I would get bored with all these really flowery descriptions. And so I had this goal, especially writing for young adult audience. I just did not want it to be boring. That was sort of my, you know, keep it fast paced and really great adjectives and make it exciting and make it, you know, not overly descriptive on things that aren't important, but then really vivid on the things that we want, these exciting male pictures. So that may sound kind of silly, but that was just the goal. Just don't be boring. And that, among other things, that's what I love to hear is when people say, oh, I couldn't put it down. I read the book in 2 days or whatever. I love that. I think that's important.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, you know, and it does sound silly because, you know, I was just talking to somebody yesterday and they were asking me about a few things that I was doing. And it was like, I described it as a fear of not stinking in some of my work. And so it's like this fear or this aversion to being boring sounds like a similar thing. It's like, I want to be something, the work that I put out there, I just don't want people to look at it and think, oh, okay, well that stinks or that's boring. And so it kind of drives you to that next level.
Exactly.
And I think, I think most people would look at you, Mike, and say that's impossible for your work to stink. But also when you're writing, and I have written numerous books, but still every time I write one, I'm like, does this stink? Is this just good in my head or is it actually good? Or I'll read it and I'll be like, this is horrible. This is the worst thing I've ever written. And so I think, part of, and maybe part of those spiritual forces, is that voice that gets in our head and tells us that, that it's not good enough and that we shouldn't share it because, so kind of that the fear of stinking drives us to produce good work, but it can also keep us from sharing good work.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And I do think, and that's when it helps to have, folks around you who could run by stuff, because I do think it's important to, I think if you're looking for perfection in your writing all the time, then that can be, it can inhibit you from going to that next step. So a lot of times just getting it down on paper and then being willing to go back and refine it is really important too.
Exactly. So. And I definitely battled. I've written 3 books in the Delusion series so far, and the whole time would battle that thought, this isn't turning out well, this is confusing, this isn't, but when you persevere and trust God, exactly what you're saying, let someone else, an editor, speak into the project, it ends up being something you're really proud of.
That's awesome.
I hear a lot of people will say, and especially when I do kids workshops, they'll say I'm a horrible writer, but what they mean is I don't know all the rules and where all the commas go. And so I make that a huge soapbox to say that, we're all great writers. We all have stories to tell. You don't have to know where all the commas go. That's job security for our editors out there.
Right.
I mean, it's important to know that information, but I really try to encourage those people who have huge imaginations, but then say, I'm not a good writer, that writing is the story. The commas and periods are important and good to know, but there are ways to work around that.
Exactly. And that can be learned, but the passion and the story you have in your heart, that's what you bring as an author. Absolutely.
Yeah,
right.
Yeah. And this would be a good time to give a shout out to all our editors out there. So Sarah Rubio, thanks for saving.
Yes, Sarah, she's my editor too.
Yes. Oh my gosh, I can't sing her praises enough. What
yes. Oh yeah, that's right. You're with Tyndale too.
Yes, yeah. And she has been the editor of all the books in the Delusion series. And I told her I won the Christie Award for the Delusion. And I said, I accepted the award, but really, it should have been you up there too. I acknowledged her in that. She's awesome.
Yeah.
That's so cool. Well, you think it might be time for a break, Amy?
Yeah, I think so. And so when we return from our break, let's get into the whole series, the Delusion series, including the third and final book in the series, which is set to release later this year. But we will be right back with Laura Gallier on the Bible for Kids podcast.
Get swept away by God's awesome story with the Epic Bible. This graphic novel-style Bible features dramatic illustrations created by some of DC and Marvel's best comic book artists. Whether someone is reading the Bible for the first time or looking for a fresh perspective, the Epic Bible's cinematic storytelling will make God's Word come alive and reveal His redemptive plan for all humanity. Perfect for teens, comic book fans, and graphic novel readers. The Epic Bible, God's Story from Eden to Eternity. Available for pre-order wherever books are sold.
Imagine a world where children of every hue know they are equally created in the image of God. This, friends, is God's heart revealed in His Word. A quote from Dorena Williamson. In her beautifully illustrated book, Colorful, author Dorena Williamson tells the story of two best friends who are learning to celebrate their different skin colors. As they look around them at the amazing colors in nature, they can see that their skin is another example of God's creativity. This joyful story takes a new approach to discussing race. Instead of being colorblind, we can choose to celebrate each color God gave us and be colorful instead. This book includes a parent connection, an easy tool to help you discuss the book's message with your child. You can also visit www.bhkids.com for a free, colorful, downloadable activity journal to help you and your kids grow deeper in your faith and understanding of kingdom diversity. Colorful is available wherever books are sold.
Hey, Bible for Kids listeners, we're always looking for ways to give away free resources for you to use with your kids. So look us up on social media and find out what's going on our Instagram and Facebook page at The Bible for Kids.
Welcome back to the Bible for Kids podcast, and we're speaking with Laura Gallier.
So, Laura, as we said, there are 3 books in the Delusion series. The Delusion, which came out in 2017, The Deception, 2019, and The Defiance, which comes out later this year. Okay. We don't want to give away any spoilers, but tell us the overall idea of the series.
Well, it was motivated by the idea that to a lot of young people and adults, the reality of this spiritual warfare, the reality of demonic activity and the schemes of the enemy versus God's activity and kingdom principles is just not something that's being taken into account with everyday decisions. So I thought I was going to write nonfiction, and then I ended up feeling led to write fiction, which was awesome and exciting. But so it centers around a young man named Owen Edmonds. It starts off with, he's a senior in high school, and there is a major suicide epidemic at his high school. And he is not considering any spiritual perspective of any of this. And then, long story short, has his own near-death experience and then begins to literally see he doesn't even know to call them demons. He has no biblical perspective, but so he calls them creepers, but he sees these demonic forces and how they are plotting against students, not only to commit suicide, but all kinds of just self-destructive, self-sabotaging things. And so the irony is he is this atheistic, sort of hard-hearted because of his difficult upbringing young man. And then it becomes his job to help warn people and try to intervene and tell them how real this is. And then he's dealing with their skepticism and they're calling him crazy. And so it ends up just playing out. We see him get older and fall in love and all these things throughout the series. But that's where it starts.
That is such an important topic to address from a Christian perspective, because I feel like that epidemic is real. Of course, it's been overtaken in the news by other things lately, but it's so just sad, so heart-wrenching to see, 11-year-olds struggling with this or going through with this. And I just feel like, what can we do to address this? So I'm so glad you're addressing it in a compelling way, but that addresses it, with that makes kids aware of these spiritual forces.
Exactly. Suicide really is just the epitome of believing Satan's lies. and all those really strong emotions of hopelessness, which I personally can identify with. And so to cause a young person to have that perspective that, wait a minute, there's someone who wants me dead because I'm so loved and because I have such a great future and because this current problem is not going to last and actually God's going to use it for good. You know, this is just such a different hope-filled perspective. And so the series isn't meant to be scary, though I'd be lying if I didn't tell you. It definitely has a kind of a creepy, intense feel to it. But it is meant to solidify that reality that, you know, this thought, where is that coming from? Is it even true? And the emotions that go with that.
And is your target for the books sort of high school age? Is that where you're going?
It is. I definitely think it's suitable for middle school as well. Parents who question if it's a little mature, some of the themes for their students, I always say, well, read it first. And then decide. Unfortunately, it's not like we're only seeing suicide in high school. I mean, it is hitting even older elementary, you guys. Yeah. And we really can never start too soon giving our kids a perspective of the spiritual war and strategies of the enemy. But I would say definitely by the time they're in middle school, even the book would be appropriate. But if a parent questions that, they could read it first.
And what kind of feedback have you gotten from your fans around the book? I saw a couple of YouTube clips of some reactions, but tell us a little bit about that.
I just got such an overwhelming response, which was incredible, and I just praise God for it. But a lot of comments about couldn't put it down. So that was neat to hear. But also just people saying it literally changed my paradigm of the way I see people. I see them as okay, I hear what they're saying and I see what they're doing, but what is really oppressing them? What lies are they believing? So it's stirring compassion in people. It's causing them to recognize that, wait a minute, I don't have to put up with this or live this way or entertain these thoughts. And best of all are the times when I've gotten emails from students who said, I was going to take my life. And I read the Delusion and I realized that I was being deceived, that this was a spiritual attack, and I chose life. I mean, how can you even put into words how that makes you feel? And we may be getting into this later, but I feel the need to say it now. We've been working on the feature film project, and it's large budget, large scale, nothing about it holding back or being undervalued. And the thought of putting this on the big screen and being able to show people in a visual format, young people, and the hope that will bring and the realization, I'm just so excited about that. It's saving lives, honestly.
Yeah. And how many people, I don't think I can say that about my books. I think, I hope I'm laying some sort of foundation, but just to bring awareness to this, our pastor always says, the world doesn't make sense without looking at it through that spiritual lens, unless there are spiritual forces at work. So, literally saving lives. And the film will make it accessible to so many more people too, which is so important. So how long did it take you to write Delusion? Did you have that idea and the story kicking around in your head for years?
Well, I had written nonfiction. So I thought I was going to, write this nonfiction. And then I definitely felt the Lord say, what if he illustrated this fiction? And I wrestled. I'm like, I've never written, I don't even like fiction. It bores me, that whole thing. So, but when I finally started writing, I absolutely loved it. I knew nothing about writing fiction. So it only took me about 5 months because I just sort of, if you'll allow me to be, gross, I just sort of threw up on the page like, this is my idea. And so it was a hot mess. It was not good in that sense, but it's exactly what you're talking about. I got the story down, and then there were different editors. I went the self-publishing route. I went that route. Every agent turned it down like twice. And so I self-published it. And then at a conference ended up meeting Linda Howard from Tyndale. And she ended up wanting to see the book. By then I had procured an agent. So it's kind of a long story what happened there. But there was just a lot of revising to get it to the place where it was publishable. But had I not just written down in my novice, I don't know what I'm doing, but I'm going to be a good steward of what I feel God's telling me to do, then he took care of the fact that I wasn't qualified and that I didn't know anyone in the publishing world. He took care of all of that and got it to where it needed to be.
Well, I think that's such a great example, and just a word for people who kind of aspire to write. And I tell my students that all the time is just get it down on paper.
Mm-hmm.
It doesn't have to be perfect. That filter in your mind that serves you at times, to do good work.
Mm-hmm.
It can be a disservice if it just is inhibiting you from just getting down the story, because you get it down and then you just go back and you work it and you work it and you work it until you get it to a place where it's like, okay, this is great now. And the fact that you've written, back-to-back novels in back-to-back years must be, that mean that people are hungry for more of this. But what's it like for you writing 3 novels so close together in time? I just can't imagine. How many words are each of your novels?
They're around higher 80, like 88,000 to 90,000. And, it's one of those things where it's so different to write from a place of passion versus a deadline. Oh, that's just different. And expectation. And, that was just a whole different level. But man, I prayed my way through. I will tell you, when you're writing a book that exposes satanic forces, all kinds of things come up in your life and you know where it's coming from. And so there was a lot of things personally that I had to battle through, but it was all worth it. And God is good and faithful and got me through. But there toward the end there, with the end of this 3rd book, I mean, there is such thing as burnout, where you just feel like, because there's just such a demand. But the publisher worked with me. They even gave me an extension because I felt like I needed that to turn in my best work.
Yeah.
I felt professional, but they were so nice about it. And so in the end, again, I can look back and see just God's goodness through it all. But it's kind of different when there's expectation and these deadlines. And
yeah, well, and I when I started to write this question, the question was, how did you make the time? Or how did you find the time, to write? But then I rewrote it to like, where did you make the time to write it? Because we'll get into a little bit more later about the other things going on in your life. But just in terms of your daily schedule, how did you look at that and say, okay, this is where, I've got this deadline and this is how I need to structure my time?
Well, the good news is I love writing. So in that sense, it didn't feel like some big chore most days. Sometimes you're kind of, hit a brick wall. But I was in full-time ministry working at a church and traveling and speaking. So it was almost like this hobby. Every spare moment I would work on it. And then my situation changed where I was working from home and I was able to prioritize working on it. But, I'm just learning in life when you do one thing. So I do a really great job writing that day, but the house was a filthy mess. Or, I wrote and cleaned the house, but my poor son, we didn't even hardly connect that day, which is terrible. It's just, life is such a juggle and you can live with such false guilt. But basically, it was more like getting everything else done and balanced so I could go write because I love it. I love to do it. So I just was afforded the ability to be home and do that, which was a huge, huge blessing. It was a financial struggle. It was a faith walk, but we did it. So
that came that. And so for you, then it was, because some people get up early in the morning and knock it out. But for you, it was like, okay, take care of other things first and then leave the time at the end of the day. Is that kind of what it looked like?
Well, I would say my day always starts, and I don't say that with a halo in my head, what I'm about to say, but always starts in prayer. It's just my source of life. And I can't live without the presence of God. So it starts there. And then I do my best writing earlier in the day. By the time mid-afternoon comes, brain's a little fried. Yeah. And so that's when I would do some of my chores and errands and things like that. And so that sort of became my routine. But every once in a while I'd write late into the night, overly structured routine stifles me. So I do better sort of, I like variation. That desk job just kill me. Like that 8 to 5, like, that is so hard for my personality. Yeah. I wish I could. Yeah. It was only so structured, but at the end of the day, I look back and it got done.
Yeah, exactly. Well, it is amazing to look back and think, wait a minute, I did that. How did that happen? It's eating an elephant, right? In one bite.
Right. With everything else that was going on, it was a lot.
Yeah. Well, we're going to take a short break, but we'll be right back on the Bible for Kids podcast. Give generously, save wisely, live appropriately. Don't you wish you knew how to handle and manage your money better when you were a teenager? Do you want to provide the teens in your life with a tool to help them better prepare for the future? In The Money Challenge for Teens, author Art Rayner introduces readers to some fictional young friends who are navigating financial waters and learning how God would want them to face college choices and car loans and thoughts about retirement. Yes, even as a teenager. While reading about the fictional friends' steps and missteps, readers will learn simple, practical lessons and adopt real-life goals to start their journey to a healthy and godly financial future. And check out Art's other titles as well: The Money Challenge, The Marriage Challenge, and Find More Money, all available everywhere books are sold.
Mike Naraki, co-creator of VeggieTales, is back. In his hilarious new chapter book series, 10-year-old Michael and his friend Justin sneak into the Dead Sea caves near the archaeological dig where Michael's dad is working. Michael finds a couple of 2,000-year-old squirrels petrified in sea salt. Hijinks ensue as Michael tries to bring them back to the U.S., hidden in his backpack. What Michael thinks are just cool souvenirs may turn out to be something much more. The Dead Sea Squirrels series is humorous, fun, and filled with character-building lessons. As co-creator of VeggieTales, co-founder of Big Idea Entertainment, and the voice of the beloved Larry the Cucumber, Mike Naraki has been dedicated to helping parents pass on biblical values to their kids through storytelling for over 2 decades. To find your own Dead Sea Squirrels, head over to Tyndale.com, Amazon.com, or your favorite bookstore. Okay, favorite listeners, we are always giving something away. Free books, yay! So to win, check out our instructions on Instagram and Facebook at The Bible for Kids, and just look for the Bible for Kids podcast at Google or wherever you listen to your favorite podcasts.
Welcome back to the Bible for Kids podcast, and we're speaking with Laura Gallier.
So, Laura, you also mentioned earlier public speaking. So tell us a little bit about the work you do as a public speaker, and how does that relate to your work as an author, or how does that tie in with your books?
Yeah, I began speaking way back in 2001 with a very intentional focus on God's biblical plan for sexuality. I had no clue about that. Growing up, I was sexually active in the 8th grade and just huge baggage and consequences and all that. So I began speaking about that to parents and students, and first around my local, Houston area, and then nationally. And so I'm still extremely passionate about that. And obviously the two platforms of spiritual warfare and sexual purity, they're very much related, right? Because the temptation, how the enemy works. And so it's definitely woven into the plot of the Delusion, because the protagonist, Owen, who again, very worldly, does not have any kind of biblical worldview, he ends up falling for a young lady named Rayanne, and she is going as far as to save her first kiss for marriage. And Owen sometimes resents this and struggles with it, and is this, worth it, and squelching all this desire. And we hear him kind of complain about it, but he also he just can't help but respect it. And I always say that, very bluntly, teenagers who make out sleep together, I don't care if they're Christians and what their intentions are, when you go down that path, it is very difficult to hold the line. And so I just, to some people that might seem extreme or even unrealistic, but I think it's unrealistic to paint a picture that young people are going to walk in purity and then toy with their emotions and physical, body sensations by fooling around. So she just has very high standards, and we get to see how that's walked out, and then her own struggles with that, and sometimes wanting to compromise. So it's done in a very authentic way, but I just don't apologize for giving young people that biblical concept. And it's not just purity, like, oh, what line did we cross or not cross? It's purity of heart. It's knowing that all of that physicality, lovemaking, every aspect of it, even the, romantic kissing and passionate kissing, is for lovers who have entered into a marital covenant. So I like that that's in there. And I've heard some really good things from young people about that.
That's great. And you must have gotten just direct feedback from that, from your public speaking engagements, I would imagine.
Oh, exactly. Yeah. And again, I've just heard so much from young people, and not just my own life experience, and also raising teenagers, but just a lot of young people. And they actually think it is very romantic, and not that it's easy, but they're just relieved to find out that the way the world goes about this so casually and callously is not God's plan. He has something much more special and romantic for love and romance. They like that a lot.
Amy, I interrupted you. Did you have a question?
I was just going to say the fact that you get that kind of feedback from young people, not parents, saying, yes, that's definitely, what we want our young people to read, like I would say, but the kids themselves coming back to you and saying, yes, this is what we want to hear. Because I feel like, we're designed by our Creator. He made the rules. So our most natural desires would be to stick to his rules in a way, or that would bring us the most satisfaction, I guess, is to stick to his rules. That would be the most fulfilling life, is to stick to his rules. And not that comes naturally, but so yeah, I think even kids are going to recognize that and plug into that and agree with you on that. So I think that's awesome that they've given you that kind of feedback.
Yes. And really too, it's speaking engagements. Sometimes the students, they're sitting there with their arms crossed, like, oh, my mom.
Rolling their eyes. Yeah.
And by the end, they love it. When you go beyond, I do talk about how God's commandments are for our protection, but when they understand why, most Christian kids can say, yes, sex outside of marriage is a sin. Even adults, when you ask them why, crickets chirping, I don't know. And when you go through and answer that question and they see that it's all about love and it's good, they get so excited about it. It's not about God trying to forbid pleasure. It's that he's trying to save pleasure to be the best it can be. It's just a really neat paradigm shift, and students love it. In my experience, boys, girls, young adults, they love it. They love God's plan when they understand it.
Well, yeah. And that actually leads right into our next question about plan for the family. So we want to hear about your family. You're married with 3 kids. What's it like for them to have an author and speaker as a mom? Do you get story ideas from them or run ideas by your family?
Absolutely. I absolutely love being a wife and a mother. And we also raised my nephew from the time he was 10 till he was 20. So at one point we had 4 kids in the house. It was really busy. They come with me a lot on my speaking engagements, and that's been neat. But I've just learned a lot through, they go to school obviously and then come home and tell me what's going on. And it's helped me be in touch. I was kind of clueless about how prevalent pornography was, and to hear my junior high little girls say, oh, the boys are telling each other what sites to go to and making fun of the boys who say they don't, and vile things, not just nudity. Really vile things. And it just helped me stay aware. My daughter, Avery, who's 17, was a trainer for the football team. And she came home and said, Mom, the stuff you teach, you're not exaggerating, this
Wow.
Locker room talk. And so I've been able to stay in touch with the youth culture through them. I have a special affinity for young people that God has given me. I relate well to them. But my kids have helped me just stay connected and been part of the journey. And now they're old enough to speak about why they choose purity. My oldest daughter ran off and eloped and texted me. That was fun. I'm not here to say that I have perfect children, even though obviously there are worse things than eloping. That was, But, it's like, here we've taught her all her life about the sacredness of marriage. And she texts me, I'm married. You can get to know him later, But I was about to go on a podcast right then. It was like 10 minutes before Heidi St. John, parenting. It's like,
oh my goodness.
But anyway, so they have not, been perfect, but it definitely took root, and the fruit is there, and I'm just very proud of them, and that they have such a different lifestyle than I had at their age. So
and I think it's so important that you're connected with the audience through your family, because I remember, my kids, in the early years of VeggieTales age were right in that pocket of, who I was speaking to in the audience. And it was so important. And my wife and I now, volunteer for we just had our youth director from our church on the podcast a couple weeks ago. But volunteer in children's churches. This is your audience, and you kind of need to know the kids of that age and what's going on. And it's so important to be plugged in that way. So that's so cool.
Exactly. Yes.
So circling back a little bit to your new release, and for fans who are dying to get a sneak peek of the Defiance, are there any teasers that you can give us?
It can kind of sound out of left field if you haven't been following the series, but it's just escalating the amount of spiritual warfare that Owen is enduring. And I've tried in the Defiance to shed light on the very reality of witchcraft, which is becoming more and more acceptable and trendy, truly like trendy. And it's being
I've seen tons of kid books on witchcraft. Yeah.
Yes, and there's going to be more. There's games coming out that just make it look so cute and fun. And there's witches that are popular blogs. I mean, it's just becoming so trendy, the occult. And so to be able to shed light on the dangers of that and how Owen combats that. And then in book 3 as well, in the Defiance, he has to come face to face with his worst fears ever, which is what happened to me during the writing of book 3. And that's a whole nother long story, but I was able to write from a really authentic, broken place. And I think we all at some point, especially if we're following Christ, we are going to come face to face with some things, some hurt, some trauma, what have you. And we see how Owen combats that, and he has to choose. Do I just run and cower to fear, or do I go through the pain of facing it head on? And so it's got a lot of real world application I think people really identify with.
And you mentioned this a little earlier in the podcast, and you've teased it on your website that there's a movie deal in the works, and that sounds super exciting. So what can you tell us, if anything, about that?
I can tell you that I had a spiritual dream when I was in the 8th grade that Satan tried to kill me on a movie set, and it was a horrible nightmare. And then I had a double-edged sword, and he was the one who died and went away. He didn't die. He just shrunk at my feet and was defeated. And I had no idea the significance. And I could give you the much longer version of that dream. But long story short, God's prophetic dream came to pass. Has been very, very difficult. We partnered with a production company that I don't want to go too public with it, but just there were some integrity issues, and then trying to twist the story into something that would not expose the enemy. And so that was a legal battle. I mean, it's just been crazy. But right now we're again refining the script. We have some really neat connections, and the vision from day one is not coming from a place of entitlement or being a diva. The vision is that we want to show God's story of good versus evil with the best special effects, with sparing no expense in the sense so that it rivals anything Hollywood could do. And so we're working to that end. And I've carried this vision for many, many years, and of course, I've gotten more and more clarity on it. It hasn't been easy. Satan does not want you to take that territory, right? He doesn't want, if you think about the Wizard of Oz and that curtain being pulled back, and we expose Oz and your smoke and mirrors, and it's literally doing that to the enemy. We're showing that he's defeated, and he's not happy about that, but he doesn't get a vote, and God is leading the way. We have a great team now with a lot of synergy. Investors that are on board, which is a miracle of all miracles. And so I'm excited to see what God's going to do.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I just, I feel like right now we should just ask all of our listeners to be in prayer for that, to be in prayer that the enemy just leaves your production alone, and, pray for your protection and then God's favor and provision over all of that. So listeners, stop right now and do that. I think that's, if we believe in these spiritual forces and they're real, then that's the best way to help get awareness out there. So what's the best way for our listeners to learn more about you and your work and to connect with you?
Well, I've made it easy. I have a website, lauragallier.com, Gallier. LauraGallier.com, and that's sort of I have a ministry to young adults called Generation 61, based on Isaiah 61. There's just all kinds of things. They're a free e-newsletter to keep people posted on what's going on in the movie journey and new books in the series. I'm putting together a book launch team, so if someone says, man, this just really resonates with me and I want to help, link arms with you and spread the word about this series, all of that can be done through my website.
Well, Laura, this has been fantastic. Thank you so much for joining us today. And listeners, we're giving away a copy of Laura's first book, Delusion. So to learn how to win a copy, follow us on Instagram or Facebook on The Bible for Kids, or on our website at thebibleforkids.com. Thanks so much for being on today.
Thank you.
Thank you, Laura.
Thanks for listening to the Bible for Kids podcast with Amy Parker and Mike Noraki. Be sure to connect with the Bible for Kids on Instagram and Facebook, and at thebibleforkids.com. We'd love to hear your comments and ideas for future podcasts. You can email us, info@thebibleforkids.com. The Bible for Kids podcast is part of the Way Nation Podcast Network. Find more podcasts at waynation.com.